Hey Joshua, welcome to the L3 Leadership Podcast. So excited to have you on. And I just want to dive right into it. For those who may not be familiar with you, you were an adult film star who recorded over 1,000 films. And I just want to start there. And how did you actually get to that place? Can you give us a little background of your story?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and I started just having a passion for being creative and just, theater, had a passion for acting, started modeling when I was like 13 or 14, went to college, studied theater, and that lasted for about 2 years. But all the while, I was doing okay in that lane. So I was working more in modeling than I was acting, but my passion was acting. And I thought if I put myself in closer proximity to the industry that I wanted to be in full time, that would make sense. So I moved to Hollywood. And when I got out there, I got an agent. Things started working out okay, but obviously very expensive out there. Not very financially equipped regarding managing my finances, living far beyond my means. So I had to get a job like most people when they move to a place like that. And for me, that looked like waiting tables and doing a little bit of bartending, stuff like that. And I was working at this restaurant in West Hollywood. And this restaurant's called Saddle Ranch Chop House. It's on Sunset Boulevard in the middle of West Hollywood, adjacent to like the House of Blues, kind of in the middle of everything. And the neat thing about that, or the unique thing about that place, is that a lot of celebrities would come in there. But in addition to that, it was one of those places that if you could reserve a table to eat, and you could kind of get in there without having, buying bottles or like having like, being on a list. It was a place that you wanted to be, that you didn't have to be on a list to get into, if that makes sense. Yeah. So it was a neat atmosphere. But anyway, at this restaurant, there were 4 girls sitting at a table, 3 girls sitting at a table. And I walk up to these girls and I start having a conversation with them, and they quickly pivot to asking me a question. They ask if I want to be an actor. And I was like, yeah, this is why I'm out here. I thought it was an opportunity to work on a project or be introduced to a casting agent or something like that. But they were talking about pornography, and they invited me to meet with their agent. And it was, it kind of like, I was taken back by it. I watched pornography before, never considered being in it, absolutely not pursuing anything like that, because obviously if you're going to be in mainstream, like that would be detrimental to your career. But the curiosity and the lack of assurance in myself, it led me to having this meeting with this agent. And I met with him, and he promised me the world. He promised me essentially a counterfeit version of what I actually wanted, which was I wanted to be successful in the entertainment industry. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to be known. I wanted to be popular. I wanted to, make a good living. And he promised me all those things, money, fame, all the things, and really not thinking through of what it would cost me, like not counting the cost whatsoever. I did one film, and doing that one film, it was immediately destructive in every aspect of my life. My mom found out, my agent found out. So very quickly, I'm essentially blackballed from that mainstream industry. Obviously, that's a breach of code of conduct. So these organizations and these agencies don't want to represent me because what my name's attached to. There's a level of shame and guilt there with my mom. And instead of pivoting when I made this huge mistake, I just saw this mistake as a defining point in my life. And I decided, well, there's nowhere to go but continue going in the direction that I'm going, which in retrospect was much easier than, okay, I made a mistake. Let's have some fortitude. Let's have some grit. Let's make a plan B. Let's pivot. Let's do something else. Because the reality was I was talented. I was educated. I was gifted at different things that I could have very easily just done something else, but I didn't. I chose to allow that mistake to define my decision. And that decision led me from one film to a 6-year career doing 1,000 films and really making a mess of my life.
Wow. So you're in this industry. I'm curious. You spent 6 years in that. I want to talk a little bit about what you learned through that experience, but what happened at the end of 6 years? How did you actually get out of the industry, so to speak?
Yeah. So for me, I thought, okay, so just backing up a little bit. So for me, high achiever personality combined with not having a father growing up. So I had this major gap in the dynamics of, having the emotional and mental and leadership structure that I should have had. I didn't have that in any capacity. The only leadership I had in my life was a basketball coach that was seasonally, a present in my life. And so not having that, but combining this mentality where I need to be the best, I need to prove myself, I need to earn it, and not having a father there, but my father was in proximity to where I was. So he lived in the same town. My mom had me when she was 16. So I grew up seeing this person that was my dad, but he was never my father. So it made me feel very rejected. So I needed to prove myself. So that want to make sure that I believed that I had value, it was only achieved momentarily by achievements, whether it be scholastic, sports, booking the gig, making the money, whatever it was. But I continued seeking after this stuff, and it led me to believing while I was in the industry, once I eclipse $1 million, I will feel good about myself. I did it. It didn't work. Once I win X amount of awards, got nominated for 18, it didn't fill the gap. And then, well, if I win Male Performer of the Year, which that's the industry saying you're the best. For this 1 year, you were the best in the industry, and I won that. And when I won it and it didn't make me feel like I thought it would, that was kind of the amplifier for the mental and emotional distraughtness and just the trauma that I was experiencing. And that led to an anxiety and depression that was much amplified, leading to, okay, I want to take my life. I'm making a plan to do so. I walk into a bank ready to, after, for some reason, I thought I needed to deposit a check, to kind of square things out. I needed to make sure that was done before I took my life. I did that, go into this bank, hand this person a check, and they looked me in the eye and said, Joshua, are you okay? Joshua, is there anything I can do for you? And that was impactful for me because I distanced myself from any accountability whatsoever. I separated myself from my friends, my family. I wasn't responding to texts or calls from my mom. So I didn't have anyone in my life calling me Joshua. Everyone was calling me by the stage name. Like there were, times here and there that someone would, use my name for, a specific purpose. But for the most part, like I didn't have a relationship with anyone that was calling me by my name. And I had essentially created this plausible reality based on shame and guilt. And I was that person, and Joshua didn't exist. And this bank teller says my name, and it kind of just snapped me out of this fog. And I felt the pain of, my life. And I really felt the pain that I was causing my mom, because so easily I could have just picked up the phone. And yes, she wanted me to come home. Yes, she wanted me to stop, making films in this industry. But my mom just wanted to know that I was okay. And when I realized that I was robbing her of that, it just broke me. And I run home. I call my mom. We have this really long conversation. And at the end of that conversation, I hung up that call and made several more where I called my agent, my PR person, and quit the industry that day, and then moved to North Carolina.
Wow. That's quite a journey. And then, just to give people kind of the rest of the story, fast forward to what you're doing today and the journey there. So you quit the industry. Tell people what you do today and how did you get there?
Yeah. So I spent 2 years, sorry, I spent 2 years like essentially running from my past. I covered up my tattoos. I deleted social media. I did everything that I could to kind of remove myself from that person that I used to be. But there was really no running from 1,000+ pieces of content on the internet that was one Google search away. But I would lie and hide until I got found out. And that process, that cycle continued for 2 years. But all the while, I start working at a gym. I'm working at a grocery store and a gym. And I decide, well, if I'm going to work at a gym, I'm going to be the best coach that I could possibly be. And then I start seeing that, well, okay, I have the ability to communicate. I have some leadership skills. I have, gleaned these skills from other things that I've done in my life. And I start having success at the gym. And I start building a decent amount of personal training clients. And then I get essentially recruited from another gym where I can now work full-time. So everything in the health and fitness space, I'm progressively growing in that capacity. But all the while I'm dying inside. I'm running from my past, just wallowing in the very real pain that was essentially medicated by the fame, by the money, all these things, just feeling the reality at the end of the day when I lay my head down the pillow that these things aren't going away, and people continued to recognize me from my past or find out about it. And I just got tired of it. And I was asking, I asked this girl out on a date, and she said no, but she agreed to go on a run. And we go on this run that never turned into a run. It stayed a walk. And I was like, hey, I want to tell you something. And I just couldn't hurt another person, because I hurt a lot of people because I would lie or I would withhold the truth. And I'm just like, hey, I just want to tell you essentially like how bad of a person I am. And I want to tell you about my past. And I just unload on her and tell her, everything. And her response was, well, I don't believe a person is defined by the worst thing that they've ever done. And I don't believe a person's defined by the greatest thing they'll ever accomplish. I believe that God defines who a person is. Do you know who God is? And I was like, yeah, I know who God is. I grew up going to church as a kid. So which I believed I was a Christian. But I thought what made me a Christian, it was contingent on me believing that God was real and that he created everything. He was creator and he was real. And that's where it ended. And she pressed in a little further. She was like, okay, well, what's your relationship with Jesus like? What's your prayer life like? What are you plugged into community? And for me, I had no clue what she was talking about. So I just kind of, I was like, hey, maybe I don't know as much as I think I know. And she's like, well, I've been a Christian since I was in 7th grade. My whole family's Christian. I'm not perfect in any way, but my relationship with Jesus is the foundation of how I live my life and how I make the decisions that I make. And then she pivoted to a conversation where she was asking me introspective questions about my life that honestly no one had asked me in a very long time. And she was genuinely caring about, what goals and plans I had for the future. And I didn't have any. And it just really made me just say, wow, like how can I lie and withhold the truth from people for so long, and then the person that I'm truthful with see someone that's intriguing and want to continue to engage with me. And it blew my mind, and I wanted to know more about the reason that she had the way to respond that she did. Just like really beautiful the way that you see like Colossians like 4:6 played out. Like, let your speech be, gracious and seasoned with salt, so you might know how you ought to answer each person. And the way that she answered me was with gentleness and grace. And she just blew my mind. So we end up going to church that weekend, and I have these presuppositions about what church is going to be like. I walk in, there's this giant wooden plaque that's hanging up, and it says, we want to love people where they are and encourage them to grow in their relationship with Jesus Christ. And I was like, Jesus Sounds awesome. That sounds great. But if you knew my story, you would not want me here. And I had, again, like these presuppositions about what church was going to be like, that I wasn't welcome there, I shouldn't be there, and that the pastor was going to tell me that because I don't have a shirt and tie on or I have tattoos that I need to leave. And this guy gets up in t-shirt and jeans and he starts talking about his relationship with Jesus. And he shares this story of this dynamic between Jonathan and David, and how when David became king, that it was historically the case where a previous kingdom was completely wiped out because they didn't want anyone to think that they had access to this new kingdom. So everyone was usually killed, but David was a different kind of king, and he actually was asking, is there anyone left in Jonathan's lineage? And Mephibosheth was the last remaining person. And he sent a guard to find him, and Mephibosheth was expecting death, but he didn't get what he thought he deserved. Instead, David invited him to his kingdom and restored his land. And then he pivoted to the gospel, where we're all deserving of death. We're all guilty. There's a bridge between us and a holy and perfect God that we can't build on our own. Jesus lays down his life. He dies on our behalf. He pays our debt. And because of what he's done, we can be restored and reconciled to God. And for me, it demolished the picture that I had of God, the Father, because I thought that I needed to perform to deserve his grace. But that's not what grace is at all. And the Holy Spirit did something in my heart. And that weekend, just a few days after having that conversation with her, I gave my life to Jesus. And that was about 8 years ago. So that person that went on a walk on, she's my wife, and we've got 3 kids together. Yeah. And and really the pivot point of the story is her. Absolutely. It's absolutely her, because she did the thing that set everything in motion. But 3 days after giving my life to Christ, I walked into this church and I was like, hey, I have a leadership mentality. I've always been led in some capacity in my life, whether it be, like acting or sports. I desire constructive criticism. I desire to be coached because I want to be the best. And the only way to grow is to get outside critique. So for me, I was like, okay, I've got this story. I want to surrender my life to Jesus. I want to follow Jesus. What does that look like? What do I need to do? Coach, what do I need to do to play the game? And this pastor sits me down and is like, I want to teach you how to read the Bible, just basic observation, interpretation, application, understanding context is important, just talking about these things. And we're supposed to meet for about 30 minutes, but we ended up meeting for 3 hours, and that 3 hours turned into 15 to 20 hours a week. And that lasted for 4 years. And in that process, I fell in love with the Bible. I fell in love with teaching the Bible. I was growing as a coach in the health and fitness space. I had a passion for leading leaders, and then that passion translate very easily into ministry. And then I became a coach of coaches, where I was overseeing small groups, where I was helping them develop curriculum. I was overseeing the leaders of those small groups, and I was seeing a lot of fruit in that. Ended up going to Bible college at Liberty University and just fell in love with teaching the Bible. And today, the last 2 years, my wife and I, we started a 501c nonprofit called Finding Hope, where I've been doing itinerant ministry, where I travel and preach the gospel. I'm in the process of writing a book, do some leadership stuff. I do a lot of stuff in the digital space. There's a project called Share the King that where there's a network of essentially digital evangelists that have a large influence. And we're seeing that if we put gospel presentations and just developing this idea of, I'm not trying to build an audience, I'm trying to build an audience of disciples. And if I pour into them with the mentality that your objective, your calling in your life is to find a mentor and mentor others, or to disciple others, to be discipled and to disciple others, if we can just really cultivate an environment in that way, I think like that really changes the game. And the very same way that Paul used a pen to reach people he wasn't in proximity to edify those churches. God is using social media to edify people so that they can go and edify people across the globe. So that's what I'm doing today. And it's been quite a ride.
Yeah, well, Josh, such an incredible story, and it's amazing to hear what God has done in and through your life. And obviously, you're just beginning, and I can't wait to see how He uses you in the future. I want to just unpack parts of your story and have you share with our listeners. And first, I want to go back to when you were in the porn industry. You know, so many leaders and so many people across the nation have an addiction to pornography.
Yeah.
I think the porn industry itself, they say revenues surpass all of the major league sports combined, which is crazy. Yeah. I want to talk about the industry, and then I want to talk about just overcoming addiction to pornography. When you were in the industry, I'm curious, now that you're out of it, what do you wish people knew about the industry that they may not know if they've watched porn in the past or have had a pornography addiction? What do you wish they knew?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, like you said, from a revenue standpoint, it's pulling in more money than Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, all combined. It's being consumed more than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter. That's how much it's visited per day. Jeez. If you, I think at this point it's 35% of all the data transferred on the internet on a daily basis is pornography. Average age of exposure 11 years old. So it's an astronomical problem, and it's not something to just shake your head at and say, "Man, this is bad." This is a literal epidemic. And for me, I wish that people knew how broken the people on the other side of the camera actually are, and you're getting pleasure out of their most embarrassing and their worst moments, because that's something they can't take back. Because what happens is, for the people who actually work in, so there's two parts to this. So the people who actually work in this industry as performers, you signed a contract where it's a day contract where you're signing away all rights to audio, pictures, video for that day. You're compensated one flat fee, and then you relinquish all rights to it. So it can be repurposed, resold. Pictures can be sold to dating sites. 10 movies can be made out of those content. It can be broken down and sold as individual pieces to different websites, and you have no say so. And so the level of consent is not really there. And on top of that, we've seen just the fact that Pornhub has been taken down off of Instagram, now YouTube, because the astronomical amount of rape and child pornography that exists on those sites is just astronomical. So much to the point where this billion-dollar industry, these sites are being taken down. And what, in a very real way, if you're viewing it, you're contributing to it, because it works from a monetization standpoint just like YouTube, in that you get the views, and those views are monetized, and the only way that they make money is from viewership, and the only way they're making money in addition to that is running ads. But if there's not viewership, there's no demand for ads. So the demand is from the viewer. So you, in a very real way, are contributing to sex trafficking, rape, and in a very real way, there's 30 people that I was in the industry with have taken their life. 30 people that I was in the industry with so I've been out of the industry for 10 years. And after the last 10 years, just people I know personally, 30 people have taken their life. And what happens is, when they take their life, when this person dies, the industry glamorizes it, and they make a best of celebrating the fact that they're dead. So let's go into honor them. Let's put out all this content. Let's make a best of. Let's re-release this. Let's do this. And where is that money going? To the people who are producing the money, producing the content. So that you, in a very real way, you are taking pleasure in something that led to someone's death. So, I mean, there's a lot more to it, but those are the things that pop into my head first.
Yeah, and you mentioned, those 30 people that you knew you were friends with. You talked about your own experience. I'm curious, if you had to speak on behalf of them, if someone was viewing their product and they actually walked into the room and could say something to someone, who is watching it, what do you think they would say, and what would you say on behalf of them?
I think they would say, or I would say, you have no idea how bad. Like, there's nothing in the world I would rather you do than to not watch that. Because the reality is, the fact that they could not remove that content is the very thing that led to the mental and emotional trauma being amplified. That, hey, there's nowhere for me to go. I'm not going to have a husband. I'm not going to have a wife. I'm not going to have a career where I'm respected. This is always going to be on the internet. This is always going to define me. I am my behavior. This is who I am. It's never going to change. It's never going to go away. So the fact that you're taking pleasure in the thing that contributed to so much pain that they thought it was better to take their life than to take another breath, it just makes you really think, how could you take pleasure in that?
That's absolutely heartbreaking and devastating. I heard you in another interview, and I just want to give people reality and context for the industry. Actually recording the films in and of themselves is not pleasurable, from what I understand from you. Like, there's a whole process about it. It's not like you look forward to going to work every day. I think some people who view pornography would think, oh, that must be incredible. Can you give people some of the behind the scenes of the reality of what it's actually like?
Oh, sure. I mean, you think, again, I like the analogy of, your favorite fight scene. I love the movie Inception, and there's this scene in Inception where they're in this elevator and they're upside down, they're all over the place. But the reality is, you don't see that and think this is really happening, or like this was shot in one take. No, like there was some CGI, there was cutting, there was, there's people who were there to do that as professionals. There's so many aspects that go into this. And in the very same way, pornography is like that. There's two people that that probably don't want to be there. Both, like, the guy is taking some type of erectile dysfunction medication. The girl is using probably numbing cream or some kind of, in addition to that, some kind of lubricant, probably medicating with some type of drug afterwards. So like all that's going on. And then you have, you have a microphone, right above your head. You have a light, right in between your legs. You have, generally 2, 3, 4 cameramen. You're in a closed studio space, so there's generally a large crew. So there's people just sitting there watching you, and the director is telling you what to do, for how long and how, and you're performing for the camera to be seen. So you're not engaging in this intimate act. You're doing this performance that's supposed to be intimate, trying to stay in somewhat connected to yourself so that you have the awareness of the camera. So really, you're taking this thing that's supposed to be intimate and beautiful, and you've turned it into something that's so strange. And when something that strange becomes monotonous, becomes just normal to you, the fact that you can just these two people are having sex in front of all these people, and they don't care that, there's an assistant in the corner eating Doritos like it's paint's drying. It like, what becomes normal in the industry is so disturbing. And when that becomes normal to you, man, the just the level of trauma that you experience mentally and emotionally is just crazy. Like, for me, like, it was nothing for me to have sex in front of 100 people, but looking someone in the eye and shaking their hand was so uncomfortable because that was real. And that's the reality. So it's so far from two people who are attracted to one another that are engaging in this act of intimacy. It's two people playing a role. They're paid to be there, and they're essentially playing out what the director tells them to do. So it's so far from something that's romanticized or sexy or anything that is remotely close to what actual intimacy really is.
Well, thank you, Josh, for just sharing some of the realities of the industry. I think some people who have watched pornography or have an addiction to pornography have no idea what it's actually like to be on the other side of the camera. And so thank you for sharing that. And speaking of which, addiction to pornography. You talked about how much viewership, 35% of the internet traffic a day, which is crazy. If someone's listening to this and they're addicted to pornography, what can they do to actually get help? Because it is a really, really tough battle to overcome.
Yeah, I mean, to start, you have to realize that it's not good for you. Like you have to, because if you don't truly believe it's detrimental to you, it'll be so easy to justify going back to it or even stopping it all. So you have to realize it's detrimental to you. If you look at, three things: your brain, your heart, and the way that you see the world. From a neurological standpoint, you're essentially teaching yourself thought patterns, and you're stimulating your synapse in such a way where you're going to crave this dopamine that that you can only get from this specific thing, and it's going to impact every area of your life. It's going to impact the way that you love people. It's going to impact the way that you see people, and that's just real. This is scientific data. You can go on several places. I love Fight the New Drug. I love the amount of research that they have there. They actually have it laid out in that same way. So Brain Heart World, and just thousands of scientifically proven studies that it impacts your brain. It impacts the way that you treat people. It impacts your level of integrity. It impacts your ability to be efficient. It steals time from your day. It causes you not to love and respect people the way that you should, because you're looking at people like products, and you start to form this relationship with people where if you can't do X, Y, and Z for me, then that's your value. Like your value to a person is indicative of what can you do for me, and that is that's taught to you from watching pornography, because you're treating a person like a product, and you're teaching yourself that sex is something that is transactional. So it's going to hurt you in a real way. And then, like, how do you step away from it? Well, number one, you have to tell someone. Find someone that you trust, because the reality is, the data tells us that an astronomical amount of people are struggling with this. So you're not alone. You're not the only person. This is not some dark secret that you're going to share with someone that you trust, and they're going to be like, holy moly, I can't believe that you would do that. The reality is, so many people are struggling with it, but what lies in the dark will grow. So you need to bring it in the light. You need to tell someone you trust. And then you need to take inventory of your life. What am I allowing into my life that's leading me in the direction that I'm saying I don't want to go? So I need to change direction. So for a lot of people, that'll look like taking inventory of who you follow on social media, the music that you're listening to, the shows that you're watching. If there's something that's triggering to you, I need to remove that from my life. So I need to take inventory of my life, and then I need to set boundaries. I tell my kids not to touch the stove because it's hot and I don't want them to get burned. The Bible tells us that that if we love God, we are to obey his commandments. So God puts boundaries in our lives, not because he's this mean dictator. He loves us and wants to protect us, and there's a better way. So he wants to protect us from things that are going to lead to our detriment. So we should do the same thing for ourselves. We should put boundaries in place for ourselves to stop us from leading ourselves to our detriment. So what that might look like is putting some, software on your phone that doesn't allow you to have access to the adult sites that you would normally visit. And then what happens is, when you put a boundary in your life, it's like putting a lock on a cabinet. It's like, well, I might have the key to that cabinet, but I have to see that lock. And when I see that lock, I have to ask myself, why is it there? Well, that lock was there because I want to prevent myself from going inside what's behind this door. So am I willing to make this compromise where I've said to myself, this is something that is destructive. This is something that I don't want to do. Am I willing to say yes to something that I've deemed negative for my life? I will have to ask myself that. And then hopefully I will get to a place where I will see that boundary, and I will have the willpower to say, okay, I might want to do this, but is it worth this compromise? And then over time, it will be easier to say no. So maybe you'll need, a deeper level or a bigger boundary where it's like maybe I can't have a phone at all. Maybe I can't have any kind of smart device that I have access to because I can't just control myself. So I need to remove access to the thing that I don't want to consume. And then again, accountability. So I need to have someone that will hold me accountable. If I want to grow in any aspect of my life, I need someone helping me and that I can trust. Because here's the thing with accountability. I can't have someone in my life to say, hey, man, you watch that again? That's okay, man. Let's pray about it. Or I can't say, hey, we're going to call your wife right now. She's on speakerphone. Tell her what you did. There has to be this middle ground where it's like, hey, you said that you didn't want to do this. So what made you make the decision to cross that boundary? Like, why did you say yes to this? Because you told me that you didn't want to continue hurting your wife. You told me that you didn't want to continue participating in this behavior because it robbed hours from your day. It made you feel lethargic. It made you, it amplified this depression. It caused you to be less productive. It interfered with your worship with God. It stood in the way of you being the person that you could be. Why did you do it? And let's have this real conversation. If there's a level of trust there, if there's a relational equity there, you can have a real conversation.
Josh, that's
and that
fantastic
is how
advice.
You grow.
Thank you for sharing that. On the other side of addiction, there's real relationships. Oftentimes your story is a perfect example. Thank you for sharing your love story. Your wife sounds incredible. We should have her on the podcast sometime. But man, what a love story. But I'm sure, coming out of the industry you did, and with all of those memories, can you talk about, once you step away from pornography, whether it's being in the industry or watching it, how did you restore intimacy, or did that impact your marriage at all? And what advice would you have for married people who are overcoming that in their marriage?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a very real way, pornography, whether you're participating in it or you're consuming it, it creates this false narrative of what sex is and what intimacy is. Because if you think you just walk in a room and have sex with someone, that's generally not the case. And and also, like, I think in the neighborhood of 60% of pornographic films in today's culture, there's some level of violence that are involved. So people are taking things that they see that are, these people are being paid to do that. They're being told to do that. They're in a place where they don't believe they have they don't believe they have a yes. They don't believe that they truly have consent. They believe that I'm paid to do a job. I have to say yes to whatever they're doing, because the mindset that you form being in that industry, as long as there's a camera and there's a check at the end of it, anything's fair game. So you watch this take place on a screen, and then you try to take it into real life, and you're seeing people do things to people that they don't want to be done, and you're actually hurting people. So, and it's you're taking something that's not real and you're trying to make it applicable in a real life, and it was never meant to be that way. So you have to take a step back and say, okay, um, what is real and what's not. And for me personally, I had to essentially starve the thought process and the desires that I had prior to that, because I experienced a lot of things that I developed an appetite for. And I was never intended to have an appetite for the things that I developed an appetite for. And I felt insatiable because I was constantly feeding myself this thing. Yet this thing wasn't good for me. So I had to starve myself from this thing so that I didn't have an appetite for it anymore. And then once I could really see it for what it was, it went from being appealing to disgusting. And then as far as like with my wife, we have a pretty unique story in that we meet each other, I give my life to Christ, and then like I'm in a small group 7 days later. So for me, like we met each other she was firm in who God was and had a relationship with him, but she was also she was coming out of a relationship where she was dating someone that was spiritually empty, and she had a desire to grow. She had this deep desire to grow in her intimacy with Jesus. So she finds this person, and now we are together and individually seeking to grow. So what I found was that when you can identify the difference between love and lust, you can see them for what they were. So all of a sudden, I understood that lust is not love. It's actually the polar opposite, because lust is selfish. It's self-satisfying. Masturbation is selfish. It's self-satisfying. And it's actually training yourself to be a poor spouse, because you're doing it alone. It's with your hand, and you're doing it for speed. So you're doing all these things that you're training yourself to be a poor spouse. So why would I do something that is actually detrimental in something that I'm sure any man would say, I want to be a good husband? Well, part of being a good husband isn't necessarily about being good at sex, but it is about being selfless. It is about being nurturing and caring to my wife. So I'm actually practicing something that is going to be detrimental to my ability to be a good spouse. So just being able to identify those two. And then I realized that, man, I'm actually experiencing love for the first time, because this is nothing like anything I've ever experienced. So everything that I personally experienced with my wife was nothing I'd ever experienced before. So I was like, man, this is amazing. So for me personally, once I could essentially, I think about like 2 Timothy 3:16. It talks about like all scriptures God breathing is good for rebuking, teaching, reproof, and all this stuff. But reproof means essentially to dismantle and destroy. So I had to dismantle and destroy this fake view of reality. I had a false view of who I was. I had a false view of what sex, love, God. I had to tear down and destroy my incorrect thinking, and I had to build a foundation based on truth. I believe that the Bible is true. So I believed that the Bible is true, and I believed that it was beneficial for me. So I built a worldview consistent with what the Bible said. So I had to change my way of thinking. And in the process, God changed me, changed my heart, He changed my desires. So was that easy? No, it was very difficult. It was very difficult. And I'm not perfect in any way. It's not like I had this like magical transformation. I was really messed up. I was really jacked up. But because I was hungry to grow, I always had mentors in my life. I did the work necessary to grow, and I continued seeking that out. I went to counseling for a little over a year. I always had mentors. I sought out wise counsel. And if you're in leadership in any capacity, man, you want someone, hey, where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? How can I get better? What's my communication like? Am I providing clarity? It's like anytime I talk about anything, it's like I want, know, feel, do. I want you to know something. I want you to feel something. And I want to take that information and that emotion, and then I want you to do something with it. So if there's not a clear call to action, I haven't done my job as a communicator. So it's like, it's like I didn't just figure that out. People led me in that direction. So if you want to change your life, you're going to need discipline, you're going to need obedience, and you're going to need someone mentoring you in some capacity.
So good. I usually end every podcast with a lightning round, which I have standard questions for. I want to do a little bit of a different lightning round with you. I want to name, quote unquote, people from your story, and I just want you to speak to them. And so the first person I want you to speak to is the young you. You mentioned that you grew up without a father. You were always looking to prove your worth and thought you had to prove it. And ultimately that ended up getting you into the industry. What would you say to the person listening, to whether they grew up with a father or not, who may be feeling like they're not enough, or that they're in the middle of a lifestyle that they chose because they were trying to strive? What would you say to them?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with wanting to prove yourself, but there's everything wrong with thinking that you need to earn your worth, because the Bible is clear that for God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, so that whoever believes in Him won't perish but have everlasting life. So you are worth dying for. The creator of the world said that you were worth dying for so that you could know him. So you are worth it. You are enough. And even if you feel like you're in a place where you don't have a father and you don't have anyone that's, a male leader in your life, I believe that God will provide one. And in God, you actually do have a father.
Speak to the person who maybe they're in the industry or they're in a life situation because of their choices that they never wanted to end up in, but they feel like there's no way out. What would you tell them?
Yeah, I would say, to your point, if you believe a lie to be true, it might be true to you, but that doesn't mean that it's actually true, because the reality is you can leave the industry. And the fact that you're in the industry and you're having success is actually evidence that there's something in you. There's something that's in you where there's a talent and a gift that you're actually not using correctly. So if you used your talent and your passion that probably went to the wayside, you probably gave up on a thing that you were passionate about in your teens and in your 20s. You probably said, man, I could never go after that. I could never do that. I could never pursue that. You're wrong, because I did it and you can do it too.
Talk to the mom or dad listening. Maybe they have a son or daughter who has gone astray or is living a lifestyle that they don't approve of or aren't happy with. And maybe they haven't talked to their son or daughter in a long time. Yeah. Maybe they've given up hope on them. What would you say to the parents listening?
I would say don't give up. Even if you feel like they've given up on you, don't give up on them, because what they're clinging to is the fact that you're always going to be there. And I would just say keep calling, keep sending those texts, and don't be afraid to tell them the truth when you do talk to them, because the most loving thing you can do is tell someone the truth. And for me, when I removed myself from my mom, I had actually surrounded myself with a group of people that were cheering me on to my detriment. So I needed people desperately in my life to say what my mom continued to say to me: you're better than that. It's not too late to change. You can always come home. And she never detoured from that. And I knew when I called her, I thought maybe she would be mad, maybe she would be disappointed, but I knew where she stood. I knew that she loved me, and I knew that I had a place in her home.
Talk to the bank tellers or the everyday people who may be working. And again, I don't know if this person was a believer or not, but maybe the people in their everyday experiences have a prompting in word to say something to someone that they interact with, or to call someone or to text someone. What would you tell those people?
Yeah, we look at society. We look at society today. We see so many people at an astronomical level taking their own lives, and they're people who are smiling on the outside, dying on the inside. In a world of nearly 8 billion people, so many people feel unseen, they feel unknown, they feel unheard, they feel unloved. And the simplicity of looking someone in the eye, giving a kind word of encouragement, remembering someone's name, doing something so simple that you're prompted to do could change the trajectory of their lives. I went from having a very detailed plan of taking my life to today where I impact thousands of people's lives. I'm a husband, a father of 3 boys, and my life every day has purpose and meaning, where I thought that my life was over. And what the catalyst for all of that was one person looking me in the eye, saying my name, and asking me, seriously, asking me, was I okay? Because how many times do we walk past people and say, how are you doing? Or, hey, but do you ever pause and wait to hear from that person? If you just pause, take that 5-10 seconds and just look that person in the eye, and maybe they want to share something with you that they're hurting and broken, and they just need someone to listen. Because you don't always need to know the answer, but it doesn't cost you anything just to listen.
in a culture where a tweet can get you quote unquote canceled and ruin your reputation forever, let alone
Sure.
having an entire catalog of films when someone Googles your name. And it's so easy to think that because your reputation, you have a reputation because of what's online or a tweet that you sent or that you got canceled, that you can never be anyone other than that. You've changed your identity. You just talked about that journey from being in the industry, wanting to commit suicide, to now you're helping thousands of people. What would you say to the person who thinks they'll never get past the reputation of what they've done in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I would say this: you can either allow your past to own you, or you can choose to own it. And when you choose to own your past, it no longer has any power over you. So for me, um, I share my past, on a weekly basis. So when anyone throws something in my face, I'm like, yeah, that's everywhere. You can Google that and find that also. So I would say there's nothing that you can't overcome. And then again, 2 Corinthians 5:17 says that person that you used to be is dead and gone, and you're now new. You're a new creation. So I would say to the person believing that their life is over because of a mistake or a series of mistakes that they've made, there's a destiny and a plan and a purpose for your life that's so much greater than anything you could ever hope, dream, or imagine. But it is on the other side of going through some difficult things. And the internet is mean, man. The internet is mean. It's full of people who are antagonists, where they want a reaction of you, or they want to be disagreeable. They are hurting, and they see someone that has a smile on their face, or they're having success. So their way of masking and processing their pain is to attack you. So just know that if someone says something destructive or demeaning or antagonistic to you, it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with them. And you have to give someone access to your emotions. People can only impact your emotions if you grant them the access to do so. So know who you are, know what you're about, and keep moving forward.
Anything else you want to leave our listeners with today, Josh?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I can't express to you enough. If you're 60 or you're 15, man, find someone that's leading you in some capacity. Find someone that's doing or has done what you want to accomplish, and ask a lot of questions and just listen. Like, that is the absolute best advice that I've ever received. My grandfather was that person in my life. For him, it was mostly about fishing, but it's universally applicable and transcends any kind of field. But for me, like in the health and fitness space, in ministry, I'm a product of asking a lot of questions, listening, and people willing to pour into me.
Wow. Well, Josh, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your story. I know this episode is going to help a lot of people, and I thank God for what he's done in your life. What a awesome testimony, brother.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.